What happens when love turns toxic? When emotions spiral out of control and jealousy blinds reason. On a fateful evening, a crime of passion unfolded, leading to an unimaginable tragedy that no one could have predicted. This is the story of how love, betrayal, and unchecked emotions turned deadly. It was a quiet evening in the small suburban town of Edgewater. 24-year-old Emma Lawrence was the picture of happiness, at least on the outside. She had recently met someone new, Mark Reynolds, and the two had quickly become inseparable. He was charming, attentive, and passionate. Everything Emma had ever dreamed of. She'd never felt more alive. But love, as they say, isn't always what it seems. Mark, on the surface, appeared to be perfect. However, as time passed, Emma started noticing things that made her uneasy. His obsessive need for control over her every move, his possessiveness that masked itself as affection, and his growing temper when she even spoke about spending time with her friends. Emma was torn. She loved him, but she could feel herself suffocating under the weight of his love. One evening, Emma made a simple decision that would change the course of her life forever. She agreed to meet a friend for dinner. No big deal, just a casual night out. But when she returned home late that night, she found the door slightly ajar. The soft click of the door echoed through the quiet house as Emma stepped inside. Mark was sitting on the couch, a bottle of wine in hand, his expression unreadable. He didn't say anything at first, just watched her as she walked through the door. Emma felt the tension immediately, like a thick cloud in the room. Her stomach twisted as she tried to break the silence. "Mark, what's going on?" she asked, trying to keep her voice steady. He stood up abruptly, dropping the bottle to the floor. The sound of glass shattering seemed to fill the room. "You were late," he said, his voice low, controlled but simmering with something darker underneath. "I told you I'd be late. It was just dinner with Sarah." "You know her," Emma said, trying to defuse the situation. But she could feel the anger radiating off him, even as he stood there, too still. "You think I don't know? You think I don't see the way you look at him? You're mine, Emma. You belong to me." Emma's heart sank. She realized then that this wasn't about dinner. It was about something deeper, something darker. Her need for independence had finally sparked the jealousy she had seen growing in Mark, and now it was consuming him. Before she could say another word, he grabbed her arm, pulling her toward him. She fought to break free, but his grip tightened. The man she had fallen in love with had vanished, replaced by someone she didn't recognize, someone capable of violence. It happened in a blur, in the heat of their argument. With his hands gripping her arms and his words laced with rage, Mark snapped. Emma had tried to push him away, but she was no match for his strength. In his blind fury, he shoved her backward, and she fell to the ground. For a moment, everything went still, until Emma saw something that made her blood run cold. The kitchen knife lying just a few feet away. In one impulsive motion, driven by jealousy and rage, Mark grabbed the knife, raising it over his head. Emma's eyes widened in terror as she realized what was about to happen. "Mark, please, no!" she screamed, but her voice was drowned out by his fury. In the blink of an eye, Mark struck. The knife pierced Emma's chest, her breath catching in her throat. The pain was instantaneous. Mark's face was a mask of disbelief, his hands trembling as he looked at the knife lodged in her side. But what followed was even more horrifying. Mark seemed to snap back to reality as the blood started to spill. His hands shook violently as he pulled away from her, the shock of his own actions dawning on him. He dropped the knife to the floor, kneeling beside her as she gasped for air. His eyes were wide, filled with regret, but it was too late. Emma's body went limp, her life draining out of her in the very home they had shared. And in that moment, Mark realized the irreparable damage he had done. The love that had once consumed them both now lay shattered on the floor. The aftermath of the crime left everyone around them in disbelief. How could love, something meant to be pure and beautiful, turn into such a devastating act? Friends and family were left with shattered hearts, struggling to make sense of what had happened. How had this toxic relationship gone so wrong? Was it inevitable, or was there a moment where it could have been stopped? For Mark, the obstacle was his own mind. The guilt and remorse over what he had done drove him to the brink of madness. But the greatest obstacle was that there was no undoing the crime. Emma was gone, and his life, as he had known it, was destroyed. In a tragic twist, Mark tried to take his own life, but was saved just in time. He was arrested, charged with second-degree murder, and sentenced to life in prison. Who was responsible for Emma's death? The obvious answer was Mark, her lover, her tormentor. But who else could have been to blame? Was it Emma herself for staying in such a toxic relationship? Or was the real culprit something deeper, something psychological that drove Mark to commit this crime? What happened that night was a brutal crime of passion, a senseless act of violence fueled by jealousy, insecurity, and anger. The shocking nature of the crime, committed by someone who once claimed to love Emma, was difficult for anyone to comprehend. What began as a simple disagreement between two lovers escalated into a violent act that shattered both their lives. Why did Mark do it? The motive was clear: jealousy. His need to control Emma, his overwhelming emotions, and his inability to trust led him to the ultimate betrayal. But why had Emma stayed in such a relationship, knowing the signs of possessiveness and emotional manipulation? Was she too emotionally invested to see the warning signs, or did she believe she could change him? How did it escalate so quickly? How did a simple argument lead to such an irreversible crime? The answer lies in the nature of passion itself. When love turns toxic, when emotions spiral out of control, people do things they never thought possible. How did Mark let his anger consume him so completely? Could he have stopped? The crime itself happened in a matter of minutes, but the impact would last forever. This story is a heartbreaking reminder that love, when twisted by jealousy and control, can turn deadly. It's a cautionary tale that shows how unchecked emotions can drive people to do the unthinkable. When love turns deadly, there are no winners, only pain, regret, and loss. Mark's life is forever scarred by the brutal act of passion he committed, and the repercussions are felt by everyone who knew them. As we reflect on this tragic story, we are left with one question: how far can love go before it becomes something much darker? Every year, countless crimes of passion are committed by people who say, "I just lost control." But is that ever an excuse? Let Emma's story be a warning, a reflection, and a voice for those too afraid to speak. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell for more real stories where love, obsession, and crime collide.